Welcome, readers. Today we're going to be working with prefixes. Do you remember what a prefix is? We've learned that prefixes are word parts that we add to the beginning or front of a word to change that word and its meaning. Today, our goal is to read and understand words with the prefixes for and trans. Read those prefixes with me. For, trans. Now, the prefix for can mean before or in front of. And the prefix trans can mean across or beyond. We're going to read some words with these prefixes by looping and swooping the words. We'll loop each syllable and then we'll put them together to read the entire word. Read with me. Foresee. Foresee. This word is foresee. We know that for can mean before, and we understand that see is about things that we see with our eyes. So foresee means to see something before it happens. It's like making a prediction or a good guess about something. When scientists foresee that certain fish are going to become extinct, they sometimes use special places called fish hatcheries to raise more fish. And when those fish grow, they're able to release them back into the wild. Pretty cool, right? Let's read another word together. Transplant. Transplant. This word is transplant. We know that trans can mean across or beyond, and plant means planting a plant in the ground or a seed in the ground, and it can also mean putting something in a certain spot. So transplant must mean moving something across a distance to put it in a certain spot. Transplant. I wonder what it feels like to be one of those fish that have been transplanted from a fish hatchery to a big lake. That might be a little bit scary. Let's read our next word. Forethought. Forethought. This word is forethought. Now we know that thought is about the things that we think. And for can mean before or in front of. So forethought must be what you think about before something happens. It's the planning and thinking that you do before something happens. Scientists had the forethought to change fishing laws when they saw that the bluefin tuna was becoming endangered. By changing those laws, they were able to protect these fish. Let's read our last word. Transatlantic. Transatlantic. This word is transatlantic. Now, trans can mean across or beyond, and Atlantic refers to the Atlantic Ocean. So transatlantic refers to something that moves across the Atlantic Ocean. The bluefin tuna is an example of a fish that make long transatlantic journeys. Now that we've practiced both of these prefixes and read several of these words, let's see if we can read some of these words in a text. Let's keep practicing the prefixes for and trans. We're going to make sure we can read words with these prefixes and understand what they mean. Let's see if we can find some of these words in this text. Read with me. Did you know the Blackpoll warbler bird weighs less than a pencil? And yet it takes a transoceanic trip every winter. Before using a GPS, scientists didn't foresee this tiny bird flying across the ocean. They were surprised. Did you notice any words while we were reading that had the prefix for or the prefix trans? I noticed a couple. The first word that I noticed was this one, transoceanic. Let's work together to loop and swoop this word, and then we'll think about what it means. Remember, you can always loop and swoop words if you're having a hard time reading them while you're reading a text. Read with me. Trans, o, she, an, ic. Transoceanic. This word is transoceanic. Let's use what we know about the prefix trans to understand this word. We know that trans can mean across or beyond. And oceanic has this root right here, the base word ocean. That makes me think that transoceanic means across or beyond the ocean. So that means that this bird takes a trip across the ocean. Good work. Did you notice any other words that we could think about using the prefixes we've learned? What about this one? Let's loop and swoop this word together to read it. Foresee. Foresee. This word is foresee. What does it mean? Well, we know that the prefix for means before or in front of, and see is about what we do with our eyes. So foresee means to see something before it happens. We've talked about how it's like making a prediction or a good guess. That means that scientists didn't predict that this bird flew all the way across the ocean. So they were surprised by that because they hadn't predicted that it would happen. Great work reading words with the for and trans prefixes. Now let's see if we can spell some words with these prefixes. We've had a lot of practice reading words with the prefixes for and trans. Now let's see if we can spell words with these prefixes. You're going to need whatever you have to write on and whatever you chose to write with. When we spell words, we like to visualize or make a picture in our minds of how many word parts that word has. Then we can think about the sounds that we hear in each part of that word before we write it down. Are you ready to try? Here's our first word. We're going to start with the word foresee. Say that with me. Foresee. When I hear that word, I hear two parts. Foresee. Let's draw lines on our papers for each part in the word foresee. Foresee. Now that our paper is ready, let's start with this first part. For. We're going to stretch out that part and write down all of the sounds that we hear. I hear 3 sounds in that part, but there might be more than 3 letters. Or, and I remember from our reading that there's a silent E that helps the O make the long O sound. For. Now that we've written the first part of this word, we need the second part. Do you remember what it is? See. I hear 2 sounds in C, but I think there are more than 2 letters. Let's write down the letters that we think match those sounds. S, E. Do you match mine? In this part, the double E is making the long E sound. C. Now, let's use our pencils or whatever we're writing with to put these 2 parts together and make one word. This is the word foresee. We remember that foresee means to see something before it happens. It's making a prediction or a good guess about what is going to happen. Sometimes when I'm reading, I can foresee what's going to happen at the end of the book before I even finish it. Has that ever happened to you? Let's move on to our next word. The next word is forewarn. Forewarn. How many parts do you hear in forewarn? I hear 2 parts in forewarn. So let's write down our 2 lines. For, warn. We're going to start with our prefix for, and we can use what we've done before to spell that correctly. Let's stretch out those sounds and write down the letters that match what we hear. Or, and we don't want to forget that silent E either. For. Does yours match mine? Let's move on to the next part then. Warn. Warn. I hear 4 sounds in warn. Write down the letters that you think match the sounds that we hear. Warn. Now this is a bit tricky. In this part, you might have used the O instead of the A, and you might have written it like this, W-O-R-N. Now that is one way to spell warn, but this is a brand new word. It doesn't mean the same thing as it does when we say forewarn. In this word, the A is actually making that long O sound. Warn. We notice that in words where we have a W before the or pattern. So you might notice that while you're reading. So instead of an O, we're writing an A. Warn. Now that we have both of our parts, let's put them together to make our word. For, warn. This is the word forewarn. Do you know what forewarn means? Well, warn is to tell somebody about danger or something unpleasant that's going to happen. And fore means before. So you're warning someone about something before it happens. Sometimes if I recommend a sad book to someone, I forewarn them that something sad is going to happen. Sometimes it's nice to be prepared for that while we're reading. Let's move on to our last word. Our final word is transport. Say that with me. Transport. How many parts do you hear in transport? I hear 2 parts. Let's write down the words for those parts, or the lines for those parts. Transport. We have 2 parts in this word. Let's start with the first part, trans. How many sounds do you hear in trans? I hear 5 sounds. And the first 2 sounds I hear go together in a blend. Tr and z. You may remember from before that in the prefix trans, the z sound is made by an S. The S can make that sound in a lot of words. Now we have our first part, trans. We just need the next part, port. How many sounds do you hear in port? I hear 4 sounds. Let's write those down. Ort. This time when we hear or in the middle of a part, it is O-R instead of the A-R. Port. Does your word match mine? Well, let's put these 2 parts together to make our whole word. Transport. Transport means to move something from one place to another. You're moving it across a distance. I like to transport my books in my backpack or in my purse or in my hands or wherever I can carry them because I love having books with me everywhere I go. Great work today, reading and writing words with the prefixes trans and fore. Remember, while you're reading, you can pause and look for these prefixes and use them to help you understand new words.
This program is made possible in part by the Michigan Department of Education, the State of Michigan, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Additional support by and by viewers like you. Thank you.